Ready.
Good morning, everyone. Stephanie Waite is the Disaster Behavioral Health Coordinator in the Office of Emergency Management at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. Stephanie helps local public health, behavioral health agencies prepare for and respond to disaster and critical incidents in the community through training, technical assistance, and practical exercises. Stephanie holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice psychology and a master's in public administration, and is here to give us tips in surviving Helene. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It is such a pleasure and actually an honor to be able to speak to you all who've been working so hard with Helene response and recovery. You just heard a little bit about what I do on steady state days, but this is also some of the work that I do with groups, organizations that are considered our first responders, our second responders, that I also really enjoy doing as part of my job. So thank you for having me and taking time. Before we get started into the material, I wanted to just take a moment because yesterday I noticed the date and we are nearing 30 days. We are nearing a month. It feels longer than that, and at the same time, it feels like time has flown by. And so I just wanted to take a moment just to reflect on all the work you all have done over the past almost month. I know that you have worked long hours. I know that you all have sacrificed time with your families. I know that you are probably really tired. Some of you have been supporting those affected by Helene, boots on the ground and in the area. Some of you have been supporting by traveling across the state to provide different kinds of services. Some of you have been sort of manning the controls at the state level, be it at the VEST or other agencies that coordinate response actions from state to local level and even on federal level. But this has not been easy. This is, we need to really recognize this has not been an easy time for Virginia. Not only for those who have been directly impacted by Helene, but those who have answered the call and served. And not to mention some of you who live in the impacted area and have been boots on the ground. So you've been working through this while you have had to manage perhaps storm damage, loss of electricity, things of that nature in your homes, and have been concerned about maybe your family members. It's been a roller coaster. And if you're like me, you've been on lots of calls, you've been pulled in many different directions. It's important to also recognize that this is a disaster, right? We're still in it. And while we are in the recovery phase, this is the marathon. So if you are able to just sort of unplug for a couple days at a time, I encourage you to do so. We take a moment to recognize that all of our partners, whether they work in our agencies or in other agencies, state and local, I know that during disasters, there are times when we feel like we haven't been heard, or there's been mixed communication, or what feels like managed chaos. We just need to take a moment and observe the fact that this is a disaster and that is normal. And recognize that everybody is doing the best that they can and everybody responds a certain way really because we all want the same outcome. Over the last month, those of you on this call have saved lives. You've rescued people from flooded homes. You have provided shelter. You made sure that people had food and water, could take showers, You've made sure that the water was safe and clean to drink. You've cleared debris and roadways. You've made sure that communication was available with Starlinks. And you've comforted the people during the worst day of their lives. So please just take a moment and recognize those things. Those are big accomplishments in a very short period of time. And so we have done a lot. And so today I would just ask that for the next hour and for the coming days in recovery, we still have a long way to go. Again, this is the marathon. You all know that. But keep those things in mind. And keep in mind that all of our partners, all of the people that we talk with and work with, everybody wants the best outcomes, right? So thank you for that. And we can go on to slide 1 and get into our content. Next slide. Thank you. So today we are going to talk about disaster and stress reactions. We're going to talk about how it is that we can recognize disaster or stress reactions in both our peers and in ourselves. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can support each other in the moment and in the long term. Next slide. So disaster and stress reactions. I like to give, these are what I call basic assumptions. And those of you in emergency management know that basic assumptions tells us some things that we just sort of need to put out on the table at the front end of a plan, right? So that we know that this is sort of the cornerstone on the rest of our discussion. A couple of important things about disaster and stress reactions. And one is that disasters can elicit stress reactions that may be due to the same incident, but they look different for 3 different reasons. And this also applies to sort of normal stress reactions and blue sky days as well. But we know that we all don't share the same past. We don't share the same history. We know there are a lot of people in Virginia, both responders and survivors, that have experienced major disasters in their localities before, in their communities. We don't share the same current circumstances, and we don't share the same outlook about the future. There's a lot of research about hope and how our ability to have hope and feel like we have some control over our future, and maybe that's because of the differences of resources we have, or our ability to sort of survive previous traumatic incidences or disasters, but we may have this sort of event in common, but our responses to them are different, and they are for many different reasons. So keep that in mind as we go along. Next slide. So disaster and stress reactions. I'll be using the term dysregulated throughout this. And when we talk about our brains and bodies becoming dysregulated, it's because we are in a state of fight or flight. Even if we were not in a position during this weather incident where our lives were immediately put at risk, that doesn't matter. Your body still goes into fight or flight when you are triggered by an incident and have to respond in a way very quickly. You suddenly have a lot of information in front of you. And so doing that over a period of time causes our body and brains to become dysregulated. So our central nervous system feels a little out of whack. We feel like our bodies and our brains aren't on the same page. I know that I have felt in the last month that my brain was on overdrive, but my body just didn't want to go anymore. So some other ways that we can become dysregulated by disasters and stress reactions is we may lose sleep or sleep too much. We know that during disasters, especially that immediate response, our bodies, when we're in that fight or flight, it serves us, right? And so even when we're working 12, 16-hour days, you get up the next morning and you feel pretty much ready to go because you know the battle is still on, right? There's still a lot to do. That wears on you after a while, but our body serves us in that way. That's one of the way it serves us when we are in fight or flight. But eventually we feel like we are losing sleep and we start to suffer, or we may sleep too much. We can certainly have mood swings, right? We may become a little prickly. I have been on a lot of these operational calls. Um, we all have been doing that consistently over the last month. And we've all been working with each other and communicating. And you know, after the first couple of weeks, I started to hear some wear and tear in people's voices. And so mood swings, totally normal. Feeling angry or anxious, short-tempered or short fuse, sometimes feeling stuck or numb or unable to complete daily tasks or self-care. When you are in the response phase, you really have to prioritize what's important, right? When you are working so many hours, maybe some of the things that you do for self-care sort of take a back seat. I know that in the last month, I have not been able to maintain the level of self-care that I've been accustomed to because I've been working a lot more than usual. And as far as feeling stuck or numb, there are just, you might find yourself some days when you're ready to take on a task, and then all of a sudden it just feels like, okay, I feel like I've used all my brain space in the last, several days, and I don't even know where to begin. And that can be from becoming overwhelmed for how much that there is to do as well. Difficulty concentrating or with short-term memory. I have found, for example, during the last month, and specifically for me personally in coordinating a response to the shooting in Virginia Beach in 2019, everybody needs information, and information is coming at all of us really quickly, and it's changing very rapidly. Another way that our body and our mind supports us in that, and some of you may actually feel it happening, but as information comes to you, um, your brain finds ways to files and tells us what's priority, what can wait, what do I need to do right away. And you may find yourself thinking, wow, I can't believe I really remembered that, and all the phone calls that you need to return. Your brain has a way to prioritize what's important when we are in fight or flight, is sort of that response phase. But what happens is over time, we have other memory lapses. There have been times in the past month when I've been on calls and I'm talking to people and I cannot recall a certain word that I know I have used hundreds of times in my vocabulary. And I just feel like, gosh, I feel like, what is that word? And I have just, honestly, at times when you're on calls, it can be a little embarrassing when I just can't find a word or something that's right within my reach. But that's what happens when we're overwhelmed. It's a stress reaction to everything that's been going on. Increased heart and respiration functions. So again, sweating, feeling our blood pressure going up, increased heart rate, these things make it difficult to go to sleep. These things also make it difficult to sort of, when we do have the time, if we do have a day off or time off, we still feel anxious. It's like we want our brains and our bodies to be on the same page, but they just can't seem to get on the same page, and our body's still going. And our heart rates are still going, and we almost feel like we don't know what to do with our hands when we do get a break and get a chance to unplug. Somebody said the fog of war, absolutely. Impaired decision-making. The advice that I give to volunteers and people that I train that go out in the field and support survivors of disasters is, let people know it's probably not a good idea to make major life decisions right now. If things were going on prior to this disaster, it may be a good idea, if possible, to put some things on hold in very much the same way if you go and are under anesthesia and they tell you don't make any major decisions in the next couple of days. It's sort of the same way. Our priorities change. We are in a heightened state of arousal. We are dysregulated, and it's really not a good time to make major decisions if we can avoid it at all cost. And then, of course, that there is the grief and loss of people, things, and the overall sense of safety. During COVID, I always give the example that many of you had to continue working in the field, seeing patients, providing services during a time when we ourselves had a lot of unanswered questions. We didn't feel safe. We didn't know what was going to come next. What was the recovery going to look like? Am I going to, take this back to my family? And what will the consequences of that be? Disasters, when they happen, we know that local responses are the first responses. And so it's important that we recognize that and acknowledge all that, we have done in the last month, but that also many of us, many folks that have been working in the field have been doing this while they have been struggling with their own grief and their own loss. And that can be anything from, places that they are familiar going to that may not be accessible, homes, disconnection with family and friends. So there's grief and loss all around, but also important to note that folks like me that sort of work behind the scenes in instances like this, while you've been working this, it's totally normal for you to feel grief and loss on sort of behalf of the people in the communities that you have been working for. Next slide, please. So for those of you who have not seen it, there are phases of disasters and recovery that are pretty standard for emergency management, but this particular chart tells us a little bit more about how people cope, how people recover with their disaster and stress reactions. We know that emotional highs and emotional lows prior to a disaster, we can all feel very poised and anxious. We may not know what's going to happen if we're not given the opportunity to have warning. In this instance, we were. And so when the impact happens, while it is devastating, there are a lot of stories that come out about life-saving rescues, life-saving missions, and this is the heroic phase. And this is a time when we really feel like we have come together. We have banded as one, and we are in this together. And also this collaboration among different community agencies, both health and human services and more traditional emergency management and first responder. This is when we feel like we are of one mind, right? And this sort of goes into the honeymoon phase where everybody is working and rebuilding. I understand that just lots of citizens of the affected areas in Southwest Virginia started coming out of their homes to volunteer to make sure that people get water and food, and everybody is working with everybody. And there feels like there's a lot of movement. Everybody is doing something. And then as time goes on and we continue to take inventory of all the things that need to be done towards recovery. And that could be from the loss of homes, family structures, infrastructure in the community, businesses lost, industries affected. There seems to be a sense of disillusionment, and things aren't happening as quickly as we would like them to. The response phase, which is where we have that heroic and honeymoon, that's when things are moving really fast. And I think disillusionment sort of lends to that. You know, we kind of feel like we're twiddling our thumbs, even though things are moving, it doesn't feel like it. And a lot of times we'll hear from citizens that they don't feel like people are doing enough. One example we know, and some communities may feel that the focus has been shifted from their communities to maybe other communities, even in the United States. Say, we know that Milton came along right at the tail of Helene, and so some members of the community may feel that they have been abandoned by their government or other community leaders because of these other things that have gone on. And so as we move into reconstruction or what we call recovery, you know, this is a marathon. Things start to improve. This is when we start to see little things change and improve little by little. Some change is so small it may go unnoticed, but it makes a lot of difference to particular families or particular organizations in the community. And then we come to the anniversary of the event, and it's important for members of the community and for those who are responsible and have been responsible in leading these efforts throughout the year to recognize that citizens will want to memorialize this time. An anniversary is a triggering event. And a triggering event, whether you want to think about things or not, but certain things will remind you of what happened. For many people, say, we know that this storm hit on a late Thursday, Friday. Those could be triggering events. Those days of the week could be that for some survivors over the last few weeks. Eventually that will fade, but there are other events that will be triggered. Certainly an anniversary is one of them. So next slide. So how do we recognize and address stress in ourselves and in our peers? And how do you know when you're experiencing stress? And how do you know when your peers are experiencing stress? One thing that's important is most of you who are working in teams, who have been working this disaster, probably have been working pretty closely now for some time beyond the last month. And you know your peers and your colleagues sort of baseline level of behavior, when something is bothersome to them. So it's important to pay attention and recognize that and check in with people. I also think it's important to put on the table, just like I talked about in the very beginning, and it's okay to recognize this has been hard. This has been hard on our minds. This has been hard on our bodies. This has been hard on our relationships. And it's important to recognize that when we experience stress, especially the kind of cumulative and acute stress that can go on since the precipitating event, that this stress can affect our ability to do our jobs well as we think that we should be doing them, right? This can affect our ability to be present for our families, to be good colleagues, to be good friends. But that is normal. But it's important that we recognize that about ourselves and about other people. Next slide, please. So things to think about when we recognize stress in ourselves and in our peers is to first recognize what are the places, people, activities, environments that keep our cups full, so to speak. what are the things that we enjoy doing that really helps us to feel mission ready? Um, is it reading? Is it making sure we have some quiet time to ourselves at the end of the day? Is it exercising? Is it participating in faith-based activities? Is it spending time with family members? Is it making sure you get time to spend outside? The last month has been really the start of fall and autumn in Virginia, for example. I love the fall. This is my favorite time of year. I feel like I have not had the opportunity to really enjoy it as much as I usually would. I think Virginia is our most beautiful time of the year is in fall. I love spending time outside in fall and just really taking time to just notice, notice how the leaves change colors. Those are things that sort of help me feel centered. I've not had the opportunity to do that, as I'm sure many of you have not had the opportunity to do that either. And so that's what happens to the people, places, things, and activities after a disaster. We lose our ability to take part in those things, either because we simply don't have time, especially in the first few weeks of this when we were working really long days. We simply don't have time because we're busy, or because when we finally do get time to unplug, we are so physically and emotionally drained. We don't feel like we have anything to offer people in our personal lives, for example. But you should know that that in of itself is normal as well. The first weekend, I had a couple days off, and I was supposed to go to a family event that weekend. And I knew that this event would take more than half of one of the 2 days I had off. And I decided, and I did feel guilty, I'm not going to be able to participate. I'm not going to be able to come. I know how busy I'm going to be in the days coming, and I'm just really tired. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with feeling guilty about it, but there's also nothing wrong with setting boundaries for your time that you have to unplug, because it's really important. Rest and recovery, when you have been working at this level and have been physically and mentally engaged at this level, is so important. Rest and recovery really is biology. When we get good sleep, when we really have the opportunity to rest our bodies and our brains, that's how it heals. That's how your short-term memory gets itself back together. Because we cannot operate on fight or flight for long periods of time. Without getting too far into the weeds, but we know that stress hormones build up in our body. Cortisol, for example, when we are in the fight or flight stage, it serves us. We've talked about how it serves us. But the reality is those hormones are toxic to us. They can cause us to get sick. And so as you feel the days and weeks sort of going on, you may feel a little bit of a cold coming on. You may feel a little bit more of seasonal allergies. It's really important that you take time to unplug and allow yourself rest and recovery. It's important that you check in with your peers and your colleagues. If you notice something is going on with them, that you check in and work together as a team and make sure that everybody's had the opportunity to do that. Some of us think that we need to be the one that's on the front lines. Everybody's depending on me, and I need to make sure this is done well. Those are all based in very good intentions and very good values, but I am here to tell you it does not serve you or the people that you serve in the long run. We've talked a lot about on the best calls that we have postured into recovery now. This is the marathon. And so we need to make sure that we are looking out for each other and really taking turns and covering for each other whenever we can so that we all have sufficient time for rest and recovery. Next stage, next slide. Maybe I need rest and recovery. So for those of you, and it's not always comfortable for folks that are not in my field, for folks that are not comfortable asking for help, that many folks don't know what to say to somebody who is struggling. Please know that when you are working with citizens that have been affected by disasters, and when you are sort of looking at for your colleagues and teammates, this does not require a degree in behavioral health, a license in behavioral health. We all know what it means to be human because we share the human experience. And so there are no magic words, there are no magic things to say to check in and make sure that people are okay. Being present, and the mere fact that you would ask and check in with somebody, be it a member of the community or a colleague, truly does make a difference. But for those of you who may want a little more structure around that, here are a couple of tips about how you can check in with a colleague that you may be concerned about. One, as we've discussed, is to observe. Remember, when you've worked with people, you can hear stress in their voice, you can see it in their behavior, in their mannerisms. If you see something, say something. State your observations. State them without judgment. So it may be that I noticed that you were really quiet in our such and such meeting, and you usually share a lot of ideas, so I'm just checking to make sure everything's okay. And so that is without judgment. That statement is without judgment, without saying, you're probably really tired because you've been working so hard. That's not for us to say. To be on the safe side, just let people know sort of what you are noticing. Chances are they're noticing it too. Sometimes we may need to clarify about why we're asking. And a lot of times is when people may be a little defensive. And I know that's why a lot of people are hesitant to check in with people, because we know that some people we work with are very strong and take a lot of pride in the fact that they are very strong and they don't need help. And so it's fine to clarify that you're asking because you care about them, right? And also seek clarification to, if it may be that you're wrong about the behaviors and things that you're seeing, or they offer an explanation that isn't that big of a deal. I haven't been sleeping as well. I had something I shouldn't have for breakfast, or whatever it is. And it's fine if it's not that big of a deal. But the mere fact that you reach out, you check in, and you clarify and let people know that you care makes all the difference. It's important that you respond. Provide guided options, clarify your concern if indicated, discuss desired behaviors, and state options in behavioral health terms. Essentially, be prepared to offer some resources. I have been on calls where resources have been offered. I've heard guest speakers come on and practice breathing exercises. They've discussed EAP. I'm going to give some more tips at the end of this as well. But just be prepared to offer resources or offer opportunities for people to take a break. Offer opportunities for people to have some respite. It may be, maybe they need to change projects, or something about the project needs to change, if at all possible. But all of these things can sort of culminate into stress. And sometimes people don't know that people may be more willing to work with them and advocate for them than they realize. And so having these discussions really opens the door to communication. Next slide, please. So more about addressing stress in ourselves and our peers. Again, check in regularly with yourself as well as others. think about the buddy system. It's always important to consider that not only when you're out in the field, but think of somebody that you work with that knows you really well, somebody you can be really honest and authentic with, um, somebody that you can bounce ideas off of somebody else. These really are the people that you should feel most comfortable in checking in with or letting them know, hey, I can't today, it's been a lot and I just feel like I can't focus. These are very difficult things for first responders to admit, even though they're normal. But make sure that you have sort of a buddy system and pay attention to what's going on in your own body. How are you feeling? Are you having periods where you feel like you should be in a relaxed state, but yet your heart is racing? You're not able to sleep. Pay attention to these things. And it may be necessary to seek medical advice from your primary care physician to see, exactly what's going on. Because like I said, these sort of dysregulation can go on to cause illness. Provide cover. So these are some of the tips that I mentioned in the previous slide. When at all possible, reassign duties until the person feels confident to return to regular duties or offer them a break or time to check in with themselves. If you are witnessing some of these behaviors in a way that may be disruptive to others, it's a good idea to maybe get them somewhere that they can calm themselves. We know that folks that have been working together very closely for the last month or so, tensions can get high. We are all in a sort of dysregulated state, and sometimes, as I mentioned, tensions can get high, and we just sort of need to take a step back. But it's important that we, again, recognize this is, we all need to take a step back. We all want what is best, but we're all pretty stressed out. So let's figure out what we can do in this moment to bring this situation down a bit. Maybe it is reprioritizing duties, shifting people around, giving people a timeout. But we just need to recognize that those reactions are normal, and it's okay to pay attention to them and speak to them, just as you would as any other logistic or need that needs to be met as it relates to recovery. Calming. I always say, don't say calm down, show people how to calm down by modeling calm behavior. Again, breathing exercises, they can be found on apps like Aura. Also, you can really just Google anything on YouTube. You can take a minute to 5 minutes to 30 minutes to do it. If you practice it, it becomes more natural to you. The more you practice breathing exercises, the more you will automatically do it when you find yourself feeling in that dysregulated state. Again, make room for people to have some space if they need to have some space, but it's important to offer comfort items, just like you would with the citizens that you've been working with. Sometimes people haven't been taking care of themselves. Offer them water. Make sure they have time for breaks, especially to eat nutritious meals. That brings me to another point that I've heard. When you are busy, the go-to thing are prepackaged meals that are heavy in carbs and sugars. I get it. I know that. But it's important. One thing that you could do as a team is maybe make a plan to where you all take turns bringing in healthy snacks, or designate days where you all maybe do even a little potluck of sorts that's easy to do, that's quick to do, that's really healthier. Because things that are packed with carbs and sugars send us on our bodies and our brains a roller coaster, chasing that sugar high. I realize that it's faster, but there's a downside to it as well. It's also important to maintain connection, avoid isolation. A lot of times, isolation is our go-to when we are under a great deal of stress. But it's important that we make efforts to stay connected. And as a person, as a colleague who notices somebody isolating, it may be easier to say, we just need to give them a little space. And that's fine. But don't let that go on, because isolation can be dangerous. It can lead to more problems. So it's important that we continue to, as colleagues, keep each other engaged, continue that sort of team spirit. Keep people engaged in creative ways. I tell groups, some things may be, so you have a designated table in your work area where there is a puzzle. And if people do have time to take just a few minutes for themselves, people can take turns, work on it together. This is also those coloring books that are really intricate, or activities that people can do, and make a space for that, where people can go and just sort of not be in front of a computer, not be on a meeting, not need to be on, and just relax. In shelters, at least for our estate planning, we like to always have a place like a sensory room where people, be it those who are working in the shelter or people that are residents of the shelter, can go to and just decompress and be away from the noise, and be away from the job for a little bit. So if possible, consider making space for that in your work area. Next slide. Other tips, weekly supervision. I think it's important that we continue to check in with each other, as supervisors, managers to line staff, or whatever, what have you. When managers and supervisors model compassionate behavior to the people that they supervise, people really do feel that they are being cared for. And so it's important, whenever possible, to have weekly supervision, one-to-one, if at all possible, even 15 minutes. So some of the things that could be standard, I used this before in a program that I put together for COVID, and I hired about 12 staff, and some standard questions. What went well this week or today, whatever? What challenges did you have? And we're talking about work challenges, right? But as people answer these questions and you have these discussions, you can really get a sense of where people are. People will probably say, this was frustrating. I didn't feel like I was heard when we talk about the challenges, or I really liked how so-and-so helped with that collaboration. It had a really good outcome in the field, for example. It's important that we ask what resources somebody may need to address those challenges. Those resources could be things as simple as, I need somebody to cover me so I can have a day, or I need somebody to take the lead on this project, whatever the case may be. But try to check in with staff on a weekly basis whenever possible. It's also really good to be honest and authentic. Vulnerability is not a sign of weakness. Admitting to the people that we work with, the people that we supervise, admitting these things to ourselves is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of our humanity. It's important to give thanks, to give kudos. Equally as important to say you're sorry. When things may get heated, when there were miscommunications, totally fine to do that. People work harder, I think, for people that are really authentic. It's important that we do things to increase confidence and competence, offer training opportunities, like this, provide mentorship. We all know that, especially for folks that may be newer in this field, and this might be their first incident that they're working, it can be very disorienting, right? And people, because things are moving so fast, some people may feel that because they don't know everything, they may feel their confidence take a hit, and their competence. So it's important that we provide mentorship, that we, whenever possible, if it's not us, then somebody else, make sure that there's opportunities for people to learn, okay, this is the process that we're engaging upon. This is why we've pivoted, and we're doing this instead of that. Take time to explain. And there are always those nuances in communication, especially when it comes to, how state government supports local government. There's those nuances that we don't necessarily learn as part of the job, but you know them because you've been doing this a while. That's good information to share. That's good mentoring. And we know that when people have as much information as possible before they go into a duty, before they go into the field about what kinds of things they will be seeing, hearing, and experiencing, that prepares them for whatever disaster or stress reactions may come. So information is very powerful, not only to the people that we serve in the community that want information about when is this going to change, when is this going to be fixed, but it's also really empowering for those that may have boots on the ground, and can really help people feel safer as they are working. Other things, dial 988. 988 is our crisis line. It is sort of the 911 for people who may be in a bad place where they need to be bridged to a higher level of care, because it is possible. We talked about we haven't all been in the same place or had the same previous experiences when this happened. So many people could have had a lot of unaddressed cumulative trauma or stress prior to this. And this last month has perhaps taken them to a place of compassion fatigue or even burnout. So it's important that when we check in, we make sure that this information is available and that if people do make statements about self-harm, you can dial 988 and bridge people to a higher level of care. Also EAP. When EAP is useful and you get your first couple of sessions or however many, I think it's 4, free, and it is confidential. A lot of people go on and continue to see the therapist or whomever they meet with when they do EAP. There's also a national disaster distress helpline. SAMHSA, they do this at the national level. The number for that is there. So again, these are some of the highlights or some of the main resources if you feel or if you have concerns. And I've also sent a flyer to large groups of people. I can't tell you who, but if you're interested, email me and I'll send it to you. It's a really good one-page flyer it's a PDF that SAMHSA put together with lots of information for first responders about, what you can expect over the coming days and weeks as you continue to work the recovery in this disaster, some of those reactions that we talked about, what you should do if you feel that you need additional support. So things like that. Really good to have up in bathroom stalls and break rooms and things like that, and places like that, so that people know that it's available. And I think that is all I had. And I'll take any questions.
Did you get questions from within the? Okay. Hey, Stephanie, I just got a quick question. Can you spell out EAP, what that stands for?
Employee assistance program. Sorry.
Thank you.
So we had one question. Can the stress be additive or cumulative over the course of several disasters or over the course of time?
Absolutely. And this disaster, Helene, may be a triggering event for both those who've been affected by Helene and those who are responding. I've heard one of my colleagues tell a story about one person that they met that was in 9/11 when it happened, and then they moved to Louisiana, and then Katrina happened, and then they moved to Virginia, and they were watching the news when that shooting happened, and I want to say Franklin County, Virginia, on the news. And so that's an example of cumulative trauma, and we need to be aware of that. And so that's why it's important to recognize those people, those places, those environments, those hobbies, those things that we do that we know fill our cups. We need to be making time, even in blue sky days, because we know in this field, something is always going to happen. We don't know when. Sometimes we know when, but sometimes we do not. And so it's important that we're always doing things to fill our cups, so to speak, so that we are mission ready. Because when we don't take time to do those things to mitigate our stress reactions, we can move into a place of compassion fatigue and burnout. And that's what we want to keep people away from. And it's important to note that checking in with our peers and our colleagues and having these conversations on blue sky days and now goes a long way, even for those that we support in the community. It goes a long way for community members to know that people care about them and they're not in this alone.
Okay, there was another question. I'm trying to get back to it. So self-talk has grown in importance in the area of mental health. Can self-talk help us deal with these types of situations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. How we frame something in our mind has a lot to do with how we respond to it. And so it's important to develop positive self-talk sort of conversations, again, on blue sky days. These things can serve us in the moment. So for example, when we are doing something, a task that is difficult, and if we are, say, for example, and we can tell in this moment, perhaps it's what we are seeing, what we are hearing, whether it be a trigger or whether it's actually happening now in the present moment. Self-talk can be very helpful. I've shared this with some of the folks that I've worked with, actually with VDH, with the medical examiners. They experience this too. And sometimes, having these mantras that you say to yourself, and you probably have them, you don't even realize that's what they are, but saying things like, the only way out is through. We just have to keep going. Or things like, I can do hard things. I can do hard things. The only way out is through. Or sometimes, for people that do respond and witness things that are gruesome in nature, I actually just read a research indicating that doing this self-talk about how this isn't real, or that this is something I'm seeing like a movie versus it being real, to sort of have that separation so that we can get through that moment. Because sometimes we can't stop doing what we're doing. We have to finish. But positive self-talk, even, I've been doing that in the last month when we talk about when we're working closely with other people and sometimes tempers flare, it's just the self-talk that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. Everybody wants the best outcome. Remind yourself of those things. And just like the breathing exercises, and I mentioned how they become natural to you when you start to have those reactions, so will the self-talk.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll read this one comment. This is a great reminder that we are not immune to the stress response, even though we are used to maintain a high level of resilience based on our job roles. Thank you for this. Thank you, Stephanie.
Absolutely. And I'll be the first to admit, as a person, I'm always very upfront about these things. Just as a person, I know myself, for example, and I know that I operate a little higher on the anxiety scale for those three reasons, right? Previous experiences, so forth and so on, doesn't matter. I know that I operate that way. And so some people have said, well, then why in the world do you do this work, or how do you do it? The truth is, it's become something that I've had to learn how to balance. And I do take measures on a regular basis, as I hope that you all are too, to try to eat well, to try to get good rest, to always sort of have my cup as full as I can, so that when I have to spend 12-hour days, 2 weeks at a time, with no days off, coordinating these things, I have a lot of things to give. And I've self-talked, and I've done the breath work and practiced it so much on sunny days that it comes natural to me, because I'm always managing my anxiety, right? So good. I'm glad it's helpful, and know that people that are high functioning anxiety folks are just as capable, if not more capable, than getting this work done and multitasking.
Thank you so much. Well, I don't have any more questions or comments on our chat, but I want to say thank you so much for bringing this webinar to us and helping our folks. We have been challenged. Department of Health, we've been called upon, and we're happy to attend and show up for it. But sometimes we all need a little bit of help, and we hope that this really does help some of our staff. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you to all of you for all that you've done in this response. I've heard your voices, and I know it's been difficult. So thank you for all that you've done.